now we have Jonathan Tyler of Climate-KIC. Welcome.
Hi. I'm Jonathan Tyler from Climate-KIC. I'm Chief Commercial Officer. I'm relatively new with the organisation, having historically been an investment banker around the chemical space. But I would like today to kind of introduce you as much as possible to Climate-KIC and particularly our entrepreneurship activities, and really encourage as many people out there as possible to think about us in terms of as a source of funding for anything in the clean tech space. In terms of giving an introduction to Climate-KIC, basically we are a relatively new entity formed by the European Commission, effectively in response to the crisis over the last few years, the financial crisis, but also thinking about how Europe can more effectively commercialize and capitalize upon its technology, which is obviously there's a wealth of technology within Europe which is not capitalized upon as the US seems to be able to do. What we've got in terms of Climate-KIC, in terms of our structure, we have 5 main European centres which effectively manage our pipeline and portfolio of activities. And then we also have 6 regional hubs, which we called RICs. And they're more like test centres, implementation centres, working with municipalities in the regions to allow the actual practical implementation of the technology. We've got a budget this year of about 45 million euros, which we think will be increasing to maybe 60, 70 million next year, funded by the Commission. About 10 million of that this year has flown into our entrepreneurship activities. That'll just give you a snapshot of our geographical footprint and really saying that we've got a pretty broad reach across Europe. This is the idea behind Climate-KIC. We sit between the interface of universities, corporates, startups, and other research centres. We're trying to basically form the glue between all these different entities and create value through our funding. We've got a large portfolio of partners from a spectrum of different areas. So we've got a lot of the big kind of name brands, corporates, things like people like Bayer, GDF, Suez, Philips. We've also got a very strong backbone of university partners, people like ETH, TU Munich, Imperial College here in London. And then we have a whole bunch of SMEs and not-for-profit partners as well. This gives you a bit of a snapshot, more for some of our larger funding initiatives rather than the pure entrepreneurship piece, about how we dissect the climate space and look to build out technologies in different areas. So there are things like the bioeconomy, land and water, greenhouse gas monitoring that we look to fund innovation projects, but they tend to be larger scale projects than some of the entrepreneurship activities. The entrepreneurship activities tend to be broader in scope, and we can be more opportunistic largely about where we fund. In terms of our entrepreneurship activity, we basically at the moment give startup grants up to about 100,000 euros per company. At the moment, the advert for anyone out there who is interested in funding is that we don't look to take equity stakes. A big part of my role going forward might mean that we do look to do that, but we will remain very much a kind of a public body for the moment, and there will be relatively few strings attached compared to the sort of traditional venture capital industry. We've got centres, as I mentioned earlier, across Europe, but the real value add, I think, in terms of startups working with us is not necessarily purely the money. It's more that we can provide access to our local incubator services and also business coaches, together with the broader kind of Climate-KIC community, of connecting you in with our partners and other startups as well. This just gives you some of that activity in a snapshot of some pictures. Moving on now, I'm just going to pick a few examples. There are a long list, but I'm going to pick a few of the companies that we've been lucky enough to fund over the last few years. Quite a few of them are actually going to be presenting tomorrow, or they may have already been presenting today. The first company is in Germany, and it's called Tado, and I think they are here tomorrow. This is a great company which is thankfully doing incredibly well now. We funded it early stage. It's subsequently attracted a whole bunch of additional funding. What Tado does, and this really is just showing you the spectrum of things that we invest in, Tado is a heating controls smartphone app, which when you leave your house in the morning, the bit of software in the app plugs into meteorological data and effectively learns your rhythm and your pattern, and will turn off your heating. And you get effectively an optimization of your heating system, which Tado, I think, estimate gives you an energy saving of maybe 20 or 30%. I think they're actually also now launching in the UK, and they have an event later in the week to launch, which is very exciting. The next company is Waste to Chemical, which uses bacteria to take bio-waste and convert it into a whole bunch of different polymer or useful products. So you basically have an advantage because you're not using carbon fuels, you're using a kind of a pure bio-waste product. This was interesting because this company actually benefited from going on one of our startup tours to Silicon Valley last year, and they managed to attract funding whilst visiting investors in the US, which gives you a little bit of an insight into some of the other stuff that we do to help startups grow. The third and final one that I thought I would pick today is Aquadot, which is in the UK and came from Cambridge University. This is microencapsulation technology, which has a real broad list of applications, but there are climate impacts in things like NOx emissions around fertilizers and agriculture, and they actually recently won a venture competition that we held in London maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago, of which I was one of the panel to be lucky enough to be involved. As I mentioned at the beginning, this presentation is really to raise awareness of Climate-KIC and hopefully encourage more people to apply for funding going forward. We have a pretty broad remit in terms of what we can fund from a startup and entrepreneurial perspective. So as long as you've got a business idea which has a significant climate impact and you've got a solid business case and you're willing to be reasonably stringent in terms of how you spend your funding going forward, we would really very much like to hear from you. I've left my contact details here, but I'm sure many of you will know my colleagues around our centres in Europe. But if anyone wants to get in touch, please don't hesitate to reach out to me.
Do you have a question for Jonathan?
Knut Hechtfischer, Ubitricity. Do you fund projects as well?
We do. I focused in terms of this presentation very much on our entrepreneurial program. As I say, the budget this year of which is around 10 million euros. The bigger part of Climate-KIC's activities is our Innovate, what we call our innovation area, and that funds much bigger projects. They may be 2, 3, 4 million euros, all again within the climate space.
And it sounds like a reasonable idea that you might be interested in products where you could closely interact with your existing partner base to evaluate this type of project and then to decide?
Yeah, I mean, I think ideally what we're trying to create, and the original ethos behind what the Commission was trying to create, was a kind of an ecosystem where partners would share ideas and where business and innovation would grow. And we do like to do that, but in so much as our budget is going to be building over the next few years, we are kind of open-minded in terms of doing both. I mean, I actually had a meeting earlier today with the chairman of a small startup company, and it tied in very closely with some technology one of our big core partners is developing. So there are those kind of things that we really want to facilitate, but we're kind of open-minded and opportunistic about both. I mean, I think if a startup company in particular works with Climate-KIC, we would really like you to get out there and access the community, because that's really the value or a big piece of it.
Okay, thank you.